The Holocaust is one of the most horrible events in history. It occurred during World War II when Adolf Hitler was leader of Germany. 6 million Jewish people were murdered by the Nazis. Hitler hated Jewish people and wanted to exterminate them. Hitler did this because he did not like the Jews and believed that they were the reason that Germany lost World War I. Hitler said that when he became ruler, he would rid Germany of all the Jews. Not many people believed he would really do this, but as soon as he became chancellor, he started his work against the Jews. He made laws that said Jews had no rights. Then he organized attacks on Jewish people and property. On November 9, 1938, many Jewish homes and businesses were burnt down or vandalized. This night was called Kristallnacht, known as the Night of Broken Glass. This refers to the mess of broken glass left in the streets. The Nazis would take over cities in Europe and force the Jews into one area of a town called a ghetto, and was fenced in with barbed wires and guarded. Multiple families were crammed together with very little food and water. Many Jewish people hid from the Nazis during World War II. They would hide with non-Jewish families. Sometimes they would pretend to be part of a family, and sometimes they would hide in basements or attics. A few lucky ones were able to escape across the border into a free country, but many hid for years, usually in the same room. Many of you have heard of Anne Frank. She and her family hid from the Nazis for 2 years before they were captured and eventually killed. Her diary was found and tells the story of her and her family in hiding.
Most of the other Jews were taken to concentration camps.
The concentration camps were a very horrible prison-like place. They were lied to and told that they were moving to a new and better place, but this was not the case. When brought to the camps, they were forced to do hard labor. The weak, the very young, and old were quickly killed or died of starvation. Some Jews were brought to gas chambers. Here they were put in a room and killed by poisonous gas. Concentration camps were a horrible place. Before World War II, there were about 9 million Jews in Europe. Around 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Many of the surviving Jews eventually immigrated to other countries. There were many stories of people who were able to survive. And this is the story of my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather, Janos Davydovits, was born on August 30th, 1909 in a town called Oradea. At this time, this Transylvanian city was still a part of Hungary. Janos had a younger brother who had passed away at age 6 from pneumonia. Growing up, life was not easy and money was hard to come by. Janos went to trade school to become a mechanic, but he did not enjoy it. He also worked as a baker. He admired his father and became a merchant like him, selling goods at various open markets. Around this time, when Janos was a young adult, his parents took in and raised a boy whose birth parents couldn't afford to raise him. His name was Shuli. At age 21, he joined the Hungarian army. 2 years later, in 1933, Janos returned home and married his childhood sweetheart, Lori. They quickly started their own family and had 3 sons together. Their names were Yuri, Mitsu, and Yoshka. During this time, he continued trying to earn a living as a merchant, traveling to different towns. At this time, the war had started, and in 1943, he was recruited back into the Hungarian army. However, because he was Jewish, they took him to forced labor camp as they did with all of the other Jewish recruits.
I was called to forced labor. Only the Jews were called to forced labor camp. How were the Jews called or recruited? Did they send out a letter? It was decreed via the newspaper that this is the new order, that all Jews must comply. If you were caught not showing up, you will be shot in the head. Authorities threatened us. Did the Jews in Oradea have to wear the yellow star? Yes, those who remained and did not take to the forced labor camp. The newspaper had directions where to apply based on your age bracket. So they took me to Naj Banyo. They assigned me to the unit based on age. Lori stayed home with the 2 kids. She was 8 months pregnant with the third.
The rest of the Jewish population in Oradea were taken to the ghettos. This included his parents, his adopted brother Shuli, his wife, and young sons. In 1944, Janos was taken to Mauthausen concentration camp. Jews in the Oradea ghetto were stuffed into cattle cars and taken to Auschwitz concentration camp. Janos never saw his family again. He later learned that they were put in gas chambers and killed. He spent a horrific 6 months in the concentration camp.
Then the Germans transported us to the Mauthausen concentration camp. They made us march there by foot all the way. Many got tired or tripped or exhausted. They got shot with a bullet from the back. So to spare them from pain or suffering, the Germans were very compassionate. I remember you told me many times that you had to march and who could not was shot in their head. So we ended up at Mauthausen Lager concentration camp. There we had no duties, just sit and be locked up. So you never made it back? No, the Americans liberated us there to Mauthausen. I was in Mauthausen for about 2 weeks. I was transferred to another camp in Skidden. I was there for a few months until the German army arrived. Lots of people died there. They were starving to death. They became weak. Where were you? In a room, a building? In a huge warehouse, crowded place sitting tightly close. I had someone on my left and on my right, in front and back. I had to sit like that tight all day long, in the same place.
Janos and the other captive Jews were finally liberated by the Americans. The American soldiers were shocked at the horrific conditions. Janos was smart enough to ration his food to survive. He hid some bread under his clothes so as not to get attacked by the other starving prisoners, and unbelievably walked out of the death camp.
After liberations, the Americans came in, and the Jews cheered for them. The Germans went into hidings, but the Americans did not bother the German population. The soldiers told the Jews that they were going to go German homes and asked for places to stay. Here we have food, warehouses that will open, and you go and eat and drink as you desire. He took his rifle, broke off the lock, and they rushed in there, found bread, food cans, sacks of sugar. Many people laid on top of the bag of sugar, cut the paper bag open, and started binging on the powdered sugar. Many died right there on top of the bag. I was with 6 of my friends, went into German family homes, and told them that we need a place to stay overnight. The homeowner said, I have a barn here full with hay where you can lay down. Inside the barracks, each room had 6 beds. Unfortunately, a few days later, I got bad diarrhea, so I ended up in the old hospital. There was a doctor who was Hungarian near the camp. Brunskin, Austria. At this hospital was good as we got served. They fed us. We did not have to stay in line for food. We stayed there for 6 weeks. Then the doctor discharged me. I did not like the outside world. In the big hospital, I did not need to stay in line for food, so I returned back to the hospital and begged the doctor to return. Doctor asked why. I said, I will be honest with you, I like the food here. Maybe you can come up with a sickness for me so I can stay. So I stayed there until a transportation was arranged to home. How long were you there? About 2 months. Around August, I returned. I had to wait for transportation arrangement with the trains. I returned but stopped in Budapest, where I looked up my relatives.
He came back to Oradea. Amazingly, Shuli was able to survive. But it was he that had to break the news to Janos that none of his family had survived. Soon after, he met a young lady who had also lost almost all of her entire family. Her name was Valerie, and she is my great-grandmother. Valerie was born on June 28, 1929, in Oradea. She had two older sisters named Muncie and Terrace. She was a friendly, cheerful, beautiful young lady. At age 18, she was finishing up beauty school when her life would change forever. Just like Janos, she and her family were taken to the Oradea ghetto. It first started with Jewish restrictions and anti-Jewish laws. And then, eventually, all Jews were ordered to the ghetto that was fenced in and guarded. Many families crammed in one room, food ration and armed guards. After a month in the ghetto, they are told to bring one suitcase as each are being relocated, still uncertain of what is going on. In an interview my great-grandma made when she was 79, the memories are all still fresh and detailed as she recalls her experiences. We all marched from the ghetto to a railroad station where there was an empty kettle cars that we climbed in. Hungarian soldiers with rifles pushed us in. They separated so many people to each wagon. Once inside, we sat down on the car floor. There was an empty bucket to relieve yourself. They closed up the cattle car doors. It became all dark. Only a slight window allowed some light in. Later on, the trip to the Hungarian soldiers transferred the responsibility to the German soldiers. The Germans provided some water and opened the windows for air. Many got sick. In the cattle car was Valerie, her mom, her two older sisters, and her 6-year-old nephew. Her dad had become sick and died while in the ghetto.
Igen, nem volt messze, ja, ott, oda vittek, és és akkor azt mondták, hogy menjünk fel a vagomba. Ott nem volt semmi a vagomba. Üres vagon, mint a marha vagon.
We arrived at midnight to Auschwitz. There were barbed wires, floodlights, and we were told not to touch the fences as it was electrified. We were instructed to disembark quickly and leave all your belongings in the train. Terrace had high heel shoes that she took off in the wagon and placed slippers on. All clothes were left behind as the soldiers were yelling, "Rush, rush." We lined up in front of the train. Then came the capo, Jews assigned for duty caretakers, and told us to start marching. As we were marching, the capos would pull out certain selected people. So first, they pulled Muncie out of the line. Then Terrace was pulled out. I had a scarf on my head so I could look older. So I left with my mom and the little boy. We continued marching. I was thinking that I will stay with my mom. Then, all of a sudden, I was yanked out also. Then, later, all three sisters ended up together. They told us that the elderly and children will be kept separately. We had no idea what was going on. We marched towards a big hangar where we ended up. They informed us that we will need to go to the showers. We were instructed to completely undress, so we were all naked. We all, totally naked, lined up, and then they shaved our heads totally bald. After that, we ended up in the shower area. We got a bar of soap and took a shower. After that, they just provided clothes back that they were mixed up and took what you got. Terrace ended up without shoes, just slippers. The three sisters managed to stay together. Valerie recalls most of her time was spent in the barracks with 6 women assigned to a cubicle. We all lay down tight together, head to toe. As I was the thinnest, I was placed to the end. I was 19, but I looked like I was 13. So every day they fed us very little. They gave us a metal cup. As we were 6 in line, each person was allowed to sip one sip, then pass it on. This was every morning. Every morning at 4 a.m. was roll call. We had to line up outside until the German soldier would show up at 9, and we would stay there miserable cold. Later, it was very cold in the morning and became hot as we were there in June. They made the head count and would not release us until about 10. That was the extent of food, and they would provide the same can in the evening. We were extremely hungry, and the liquid was mostly water with tiny solids in it. They provided one slice of bread for so many people. I got one slice for the 3 of us that we hid for later. In the evening, they would do the roll call again. We just sat all day until time for roll call. I have not heard from my mom. There was another work camp nearby. Many went there, and they would be tattooed with the numbers. In the meantime, every day there was a selection process. When someone were pulled out for work and some for death camp. We were always anxious of this outcome. Skinny ones were taken to the gas chamber. We were always terrified. She never saw her mother and her nephew again. She and her sisters spent 6 unimaginable months there. Then, one day they were ordered to form 2 lines. Then, Nazi officer Mengele showed up. He instructed to everyone strip naked and march in front of him. He had a floodlight. Each person would face him naked, then turn around, and he would point to go one way or go the other towards the kitchen. If he would see the slightest imperfection on the skin, they would be sent the other way. Most were sent across the street. We, Muncie and I, were told to go across the street. So Terrace was very thin, so they directed her to the kitchen. We were terrified and would not say anything. Terrace went to the kitchen, and we would never see her again. The last 6 months, she had no shoes, and the slippers fall apart, and was barefoot, and always had a runny nose. There was nothing wrong with her. The remaining prisoners were ordered to get dressed and were placed in trucks like cattle once again. Now it was just the 2 sisters, Valerie and Muncie. They ended up at a labor camp working in a factory, still uncertain of their fate. After some time, their work schedule diminished, but so did the food supply. The Allied soldiers were closing in. After 6 unimaginably horrific months, Valerie and Muncie were finally saved by the Russian army. Valerie was very weak with typhus and had to be put in a hospital. She was even too weak to feed herself. Fortunately, she had a guardian angel in the form of a fellow survivor in the room with her. This kind woman spoon-fed Valerie, and this is the reason that she was able to survive. Once recovered, Valerie went back to Aradia with her sole surviving sister Muncie. She soon met Janos, and they found comfort being together. They got married on February 3rd, 1946. Life was slowly getting better after the war, although there were still not many job opportunities and food supplies. On June 10, 1947 in Aradia, my grandfather, Yoshka, was born. By this time, Aradia became part of Romania under communist regime. Life was still hard, and there was a lot of anti-Semitic attitude. Because of this, there was an opportunity to leave Romania and either go to Israel or America. In 1965, my grandfather and his parents decided to leave and go to America. They were each allowed 1 suitcase for all of their belongings. After 6 months in Vienna, Austria, they were given permission to enter Los Angeles. They settled in West Hollywood in a 1-bedroom apartment where they resided for many decades. The American dream came true. A couple of generations were born and raised here, and I'm grateful to stand before you all today.